Chapter 4. It was now 8 o'clock Sunday morning. Most of the maimed, wounded, and dead from the inner city had been brought in. The hot, windy Saturday night in Los Angeles had been an especially brutal one. 3 murders, 26 stabbings, and 32 serious wounds from gunshot. As usual, County General had been in a state of chaos throughout the entire night. The nurses, orderlies, interns, and doctors were about exhausted as the bright, clear morning broke out over Los Angeles. For Joe Collins, the night had been especially tiring. The excitement of speaking with Kenyatta, the presence of Elliot Stone, and the constant watch that the young black orderly attempted to maintain over the wounded OEO worker. After his conversation with Kenyatta, Collins had used every excuse his excited mind could create to get down to the operating room and check on the progress of Stone. The surgeon had taken 5 hours to extract the shotgun pellets and another hour to remove the burnt skin and then graft fresh skin from other parts of Stone's body onto the scorched area. According to the nurses, Stone was in satisfactory condition and was expected to live. Each time Collins returned to the operating room, he was greeted with a new entourage of policemen and plainclothes detectives. It was obvious to everyone that Stone was a special patient whom the police had a very keen interest in. The policy of the hospital with people like Stone was to keep the authorities as far away as possible from the wounded victim. More than once, an energetic cop in his desire to extract information would go to brutal lengths, oftentimes resulting in the patient's death. An investigation had been launched 3 years before by the NAACP, and their findings had prompted a standing hands-off policy towards patients in County General. The police would have to wait until the doctor specifically gave them the go-ahead. Kenyatta had explained this situation to Collins in their second phone conversation. He had told the young orderly that the only time available to them would be immediately after the operation, when Stone was to be removed to his bedroom. Otherwise, a guard would be posted, making kidnapping risky to the point of suicide. Collins told Kenyatta that he understood and that he would get a nurse to help him remove Stone from the hospital. The fact that Collins had recruited a nurse seemed to impress Kenyatta. Everything was set. An ambulance with 2 of Kenyatta's men as attendants would be waiting in the garage beneath the hospital. All that was needed was for Collins to get the man down to the garage. Of course, Collins would have to sacrifice his job at the hospital, but Kenyatta had eased the young man's worries by telling him that he would be well taken care of. At 20 minutes past 8, Nurse Ellie Jenkins walked quickly out of the operating room and found Joe Collins leaning against a water fountain smoking a cigarette.
Hey, Joe, you can talk to your friend. They're bringing him out now.
You gonna take the stretcher, Ellie? Joe asked excitedly.
Sure, I gotta go now.
The young black nurse turned her back and skipped back into the room. Collins felt inside his white smock and held the snub-nosed .38 lightly. He and Ellie would wheel Stone back into the elevator, along with one other orderly. Not one except Joe Collins knew what was to happen after they got inside. Collins waited next to the door. Ellie and another black orderly pushed open doors and pushed Elliot Stone toward the elevator. A plasma bottle hung from a rack above his head. Stone's face was an odd mixture of black and gray. His eyes were closed, but he was breathing.
How is he?
Collins asked, staring down at the chiseled, handsome face.
Pretty fine, the doctors say. Couple of weeks, and he'll be normal.
The elevator doors opened, and Ellie and the orderly pushed a stretcher inside the cubicle. Behind him, Collins could hear the approaching footsteps of the police officers. They had been in the coffee machine when Stone had been taken out of the room.
Could I ride up with you, Ellie?
Collins asked, his hand inside his smock where the .38 rested.
Sure, Joe.
Ellie replied, then turned to the other orderly.
He's a friend,
she said. The elevator doors began to close, but one of the police officers, a huge white man with a large belly, jammed his hand between them and caused the automatic opening device to function.
I'll ride with you,
the officer said in a low, gruff voice.
Afraid not, sir,
Collins replied.
We're taking him to the 8th floor. You meet us there.
The cop stared at Collins hard. Obviously, the little black would not move. The officer thought for a moment that he would be able through hospital policy, but it was apparent that Collins knew the rules.
Okay, 8th floor,
the officer said angrily. Inside the elevator, Collins waited for the doors to close before he pushed a button for the basement.
What you doing, Joe?
Ellie asked. The orderly stood across from Collins. He was a large black man, slow and ponderous, but huge. Collins could feel the man's eyes on him, could feel him beginning to move in his direction. Without bothering to answer Ellie, Collins pulled the pistol from inside his smock.
Now listen, both of you,
he began quickly.
I don't want no kind of jive, dig? Just stay cool and everything'll be alright.
The look on Ellie's face was one of shock and horror. She had known Joe Collins for a long time, and yet had never seen him like this. They rode in silence down the 3 floors to the basement. Finally, the elevator came to a crunching halt. The doors opened and revealed the huge concrete garage. An ambulance was waiting off to the right, just where Kenyatta said it would be.
Okay now,
Collins said.
Let's move him out of here.
He held the gun on the orderly as the larger man pushed the stretcher out into the garage. Ellie waited until the elevator was empty, then moved out herself. The 2 black men driving the ambulance jumped out of the front seat, ran behind, and opened the large swinging doors. They lifted the stretcher up and eased it inside. One of the men was Rufus. He looked at Collins carefully.
You Collins?
Yeah, Collins replied.
Very cool,
Rufus said, in the way of a compliment.
You better get yourself in the back. We got some kind of traveling to do.
Collins turned to Ellie.
Sorry, babe,
he began.
But this was heavy shit. You both get out of here, dig?
Ellie stared at Collins, still not fully comprehending what was happening. The orderly stood next to her, staring with a baleful frown at Collins as he leaped into the rear of the ambulance. As Collins was about to pull the back door of the ambulance shut, the orderly made his move. The large black man tried to reach the alarm button next to the elevator. Quickly, Collins raised his gun, aimed at the man's legs, and fired. The explosion rang out through the garage, the sound of the gunshot bouncing madly off the pillars and walls. Ellie screamed loudly when she saw the left side of the orderly's leg ripped away by the bullet. She had seen many a victim of shootings, yet had never witnessed a man getting hit by a bullet. Collins slammed the door to the ambulance, and Rufus made the vehicle squeal loudly as he tore toward the exit. At the exit gates stood two armed security guards who had seen the shooting at the far end of the garage. They both held .45s, aiming directly at the fast-approaching ambulance. Rufus lowered himself behind the wheel and slammed down hard on the accelerator. The two guards began shooting. 2 bullets shattered the windshield of the ambulance. Before either guard had a chance to get in another round, the speeding red vehicle was on top of them. The guard on the passenger side leaped for his life, rolling around on the concrete and finally slamming up against the wall. The other guard was a little slower than his partner and paid for it with his life. The front of the ambulance smashed into his upper legs and midsection with a sickening crunch. The white man doubled up, rested for a moment on the hood, then flew off to the side crazily. His body flew 20 feet through the air like a rag doll before smashing up against a pillar. The guard was wrapped around the post, almost as though he had been stuck there with glue. Then slowly, he began sliding downward toward the floor. When he hit bottom, his body twisted into a gruesome distortion of what it once had been. His arms were thrown out of their sockets, twisted completely behind his back. One leg was resting against his side at an upward angle, having been torn completely from its socket. The man's face was smashed into a raw mass of pulp, hair, and flesh. His head was crushed so badly it was now half the size it once had been. Joe Collins peered out the back window of the ambulance in time to see the man crumpled on the floor. A wave of extreme nausea hit him hard. Rufus drove like a madman through the empty Sunday morning streets of Los Angeles. He knew it would take at least 5 minutes, maybe more, before the hospital was aware of what had happened. The only witness left alive were the girl and the black orderly. Kenyatta, Betty, the 2 nurses, and 3 of Kenyatta's men were waiting in the alleyway behind Kenyatta's apartment. Rufus pulled the ambulance into the small street and stopped. Joe Collins popped open the rear doors and jumped out. He stood face to face with Kenyatta. The leader towered over the man. "Collins, my man," Kenyatta said quietly. "I want to thank you for this." The 2 black men shook hands while Stone's body was pulled from the ambulance. Within a minute, the 3 Kenyatta men were lugging the stretcher up the stairs and toward Kenyatta's apartment. Rufus climbed back into the ambulance and drove off, with one of Kenyatta's men following him in an old Ford. The entire exchange had taken less than 2 minutes. Kenyatta had surveyed the window surrounding the alley, seeing if anyone had looked out to see what was happening. As far as he could tell, no one had. What once had been the living room in Kenyatta's apartment was now a hospital room, complete with hospital bed, transfusion equipment, and medicines. Waiting inside for the delivery of his patient was a small, heavy-set black man who wore strong glasses and spoke in a soft, orderly voice. When Stone was brought into the room by the 2 nurses, Dr. Lucius Davis immediately set to work examining the wounded man. Kenyatta stood next to the door and watched the small doctor as he pulled Stone's gown up to his neck and began checking the wounds. The young black's body was riddled with small incisions and stitches. His legs were gnarled and covered with grafted pieces of skin.
How does he look?
Kenyatta asked anxiously as Davis replaced Stone's gown.
Not too bad, Kenyatta. If I had the x-rays, I could tell you whether or not they got all the metal out. But as far as I can see, they did.
When do you think he'll come around? Well, Davis began, he's still under the anesthetic. Soon as that wears off, he'll be in a lot of pain. Maybe too much to keep him awake. Might have to give him something. Kenyatta felt a twinge inside him. He wanted to question Stone to get an identification of the men who had hit the house. But more than that, he wanted to know what was in the photographs that Stone had taken to the house before the attack. If Stone regained consciousness, then he would try to extract those answers. Let me know when he comes around, Kenyatta said. And I want you and the 2 nurses here to stand by him every minute, okay? Inside the living room, Kenyatta's small band of close friends sat on the sofa and the chairs. Collins stood against the wall smoking a cigarette. He was still not used to the fact that he was this close to the big man. Everything to him was exciting, a complete change in his life that he had been anticipating for some time. As soon as Rufus and Edgar get back, Kenyatta said to the group, we'll have it wrapped. Everyone here dig their gigs well, especially Joe Collins. Then Kenyatta proceeded to introduce young Collins to everyone in the room. What do we do now? Allen, one of Kenyatta's closest men, asked after the introductions. We wait, Kenyatta replied. We wait till Elliot is well enough. Then we find out who's involved and we go from there. Those dudes who brought this shit down are going to pay. They're going to pay with their motherfucking lives. No one in the room doubted Kenyatta's words. They had all heard them before, except for Collins, and even for the young black man who had just entered the domain of Kenyatta. The words sent a chill down his spine. No way in the world would he trade places with the men responsible for what had happened at the OEO office. Kenyatta's words were not a warning, nor were they a threat. Simply put, they were a promise. Within the hour, Rufus and Edgar returned. The ambulance had been hidden inside the small warehouse. No one had seen them, and the entire operation had come off without a hitch. The small group of black men sat down to a large breakfast prepared by Betty and began discussing their plans for the future. By the time they had finished breakfast, a general plan was formulated. Collins had sat back in his chair, drinking coffee and watching Kenyatta and his men as they conversed. It was not difficult to believe that this small group of well-trained black men would bring havoc upon the men responsible. It was not difficult to believe that, because of what had happened, many men somewhere in Los Angeles would be dead before the week was out.